The stories. What stayed behind in this motel room window? The room was standard. Two beds, a humming wall unit, and a window that faced the parking lot where big rigs idled through the night. What didn't look standard, once the sun rose low and flat, was the faint writing that only appeared across the glass at a shallow angle backward, patchy, like a message scrubbed hard but not gone. Rhea Mallory, 37, an insurance field adjuster on a week of hail damage claims, noticed it as she packed. She had meant to drink the motel's thin coffee, make 2 calls, and hit the interstate before the heat came up. The plan wobbled when the gold light caught on the pane and stitched a sentence out of streaks. She leaned close. 3 words. Reversed. As if intended for someone outside. The first resolved quickest. He. The second took longer. Was. The third broke into stuttered islands before joining. Here. Rhea didn't trust hunches for work, but she did trust her eyes. The glass held something that wanted to stay. She touched the pane with her knuckle, careful not to smear. The letters were not marker or paint. They looked like oil lifts, the kind that come from fingers pressed to a clean surface, then wiped without full success. Years of photographing dent patterns and windshield webs had made her look for directionality, downstrokes, stopping points. The H's verticals were heavier at the top. Somebody had reached up to write it. The height matched a kid, maybe a small teenager, maybe someone standing on a heel. The backward presentation meant whoever wrote it had been inside the room, not out in the lot. Rhea stepped back, then forward again, catching the angle to reread. He was here. It wasn't much by itself. Still, it clicked against something she half remembered. A flyer she'd seen in a gas station along this same highway, western Nevada. A wide run of sage and salt flat about a kid who had vanished years ago, last seen near an old roadside motel. The details on the flyer had been faded and generalized, and she hated the feeling of turning strangers into puzzles. But the message on the glass wouldn't let go. She snapped a photo, then another with the curtain pulled halfway to throw side shadow. Insurance habit. She set her phone on the sill and made a line in her notebook, room 23, north building, roadside motel, off the state route, near the truck stop, morning light from the east. She added the date in her own style, early September of 2011, because she'd learned that memory softens the edges of time. Down at the front desk, a man with the posture of a coiled garden hose slid a receipt across the counter. He wore a shirt with a stitched name. Denton Kroll, property manager. He had the long stare of someone who had solved the same small problems for too many seasons. Rhea mentioned the window, casual like it was a maintenance note. Cleaning streaks, Kroll said. Windex when the sun hits. He tapped the desk with a capped pen. Happens. Could be, she said. It looks like words, though. Backward, like someone wrote from inside. People do all kinds of things to glass, he said, not looking up. Kids breathe and draw hearts. Guests leave handprints. Our crew wipes it down. Since when have you managed this place? Rhea asked. Still casual. Late 2000s, he said. Before that, it was old Mr. Levitt's. He let things slide. We've replaced a lot of panes, Truth told. He would not say more, and she didn't push. It wasn't her business. She was there for roof photos and the dent farm on a fleet of sedans. But curiosity has a way of hiring a seat beside duty. Back in the room, she stood the motel stationary on edge to catch more oblique light. The letters resolved again. She took a slow breath, then put her phone on voice memo not to narrate, just to capture the ambient hum and her measures. A trick a photographer had taught her to anchor memory later. The air smelled like old cleaner and the metal tang of the window track. Her internal clue came by accident. When she slid the curtain fully open, the bottom hem snagged on a plastic spacer in the aluminum frame. The spacer was cracked, held with a sliver of old tape. The tape wore a different sheen than the rest of the frame. Brittle amber with torn fibers pressed into it. On top of that tape, ground into the glue, lay a tiny fleck of blue wax, the kind cheap crayons leave. Someone had taped something in place, maybe a page, maybe a label long enough for wax to settle, It matched the backward writing. If a sign had ever been stuck there, it would read correctly to the room. She wrapped the little tape shard in the motel stationery, not as evidence she wasn't law enforcement, but because it felt wrong to leave it to a vacuum head. She took macro shots of the frame, the spacer, the wax fleck, and the area of glass where the words showed best. Then she checked out, turned in her key card, and drove to the first claim 2 towns over. She told herself it would end there. It didn't. At lunch in a diner with counter stools and a corkboard of lost puppies and church suppers, she asked the waitress if the motel had any stories. The waitress, thin braid, name tag reading, Paloma rolled her eyes. Depends on your appetite, Paloma said. Folks, stop, sleep, leave. Years back, a trooper sat there with coffee for a week straight. Didn't say why, just watched the door. Remember when? Rhea asked. Late 90s? Maybe early 2000s? Paloma said. Time fuzzes. He had a name like Otero, or something like that. People said a kid was missing. No one talked specifics. Rhea looked at her phone photos again in the car. He was here. She tried to leave it alone. That night, at another motel 2 counties away, she gave in and called the number on a public information page she found for the State Highway Patrol. A desk officer forwarded her to a sergeant who handled cold inquiries. She left a measured voicemail, using evidence terms that felt correct to her station. I'm calling about a motel window in Western Nevada. Room 23, North Building. There's old oil-lifted writing that reads, he was here when viewed at an oblique angle. There's also tape residue with blue crayon wax embedded in a spacer on the frame. I'm not asserting anything, just saw it, photographed it, and thought it might matter if there were any archived calls tied to that property. A day later, a woman called back, voice steady, words spare. She introduced herself as Sergeant Mara Vickery. Rhea put her on speaker and laid out exactly what she'd seen in order. Vickery didn't indulge or discourage. She asked for the photos and the exact position of the room relative to the parking lot. She also asked about the condition of the glass scratches, chips, or a logo in the corner that would indicate the manufacturer and tempering date. Rhea checked. The corner carried a faint etched mark. She had to tilt it hard to read. She wrote it down. Vickery hummed. The way someone does when a thing aligns with a file in memory? Here's what we have, reportedly, Vickery said. In late spring of 1999, a teenage boy traveling with extended family was reported missing along that corridor. Last confirmed sighting was a convenience store, 2 exits from your motel. Dispatch logs note a search and a hotel canvas. Witness statements varied. No sign. The case is cold, not active. We do not discuss names. Her tone made a boundary plain without being harsh. I'm not asking for any names, Rhea said. I can send you everything. One more thing, there's a crack in the plastic spacer on the frame that's been taped over for a long time. The tape is ambered. There's blue crayon wax ground into it that felt like it was from inside, not outside. Copy that, Vickery said. Send what you have. Rhea sent the photos with a short note. She expected silence. Instead, Vickery called again the next afternoon. The mark you read on the glass etching is interesting, the sergeant said. It indicates the glass was manufactured in 2003. The motel you stayed in? Our old notes suggest it had original panes at the time of the search in 1999. So, if the panel in room 23 was replaced sometime after 2003, whatever writing you saw could predate that replacement only if transferred in some way. More likely, the writing was made after 2003, meaning the message came later than the disappearance, Rhea said. Most likely, Vickery said. This isn't a TV turn. It doesn't solve anything. But it revises assumptions about timeline and occupancy. It suggests someone connected, or someone who wanted us to think they were connected, came back to that room after 2003. We would need maintenance records to know exactly when the glass went in. It made sense, and it did not hand her any drama. It did offer direction. Rhea drove back after her last claim and asked for Kroll again. She didn't pretend she had authority. She did not hint at leverage. She simply showed the macro photo of the etching and the cracked spacer and asked if he had any records on window replacements. Kroll rubbed his jaw as if checking for new bones. We replaced a batch after a wind event, he said. Glass was whistling. I'll look. He returned with a gray file folder crusted with post-its. Inside sat stapled invoices with dates in the margins. Early August of 2007, Units 12 through 24, North Building. Supplier, Lima's Glass Service. Installer initials? You mind if I photograph these? Rhea asked. Knock yourself out, Kroll said, and for the first time, he looked tired in a way that wasn't irritated, just human. The external confirmation came when Rhea called the number on one of the old invoices and got a man answering on the second ring. Limas, he said. Hector speaking. He remembered the job, long run of aluminum frames that had gone chalky from sun, Hector Limas said. We swapped panes and spacers where needed. I had to rig a few things because the sill channels were bent. We didn't touch curtains. New tempered glass, stamped 2003 because that's what the distributor had bulk. Do you remember room 23? Rhea asked, knowing the question was broad and that memory is a wide net. Vaguely, he said. I remember one where the inside of the glass looked fingerprinted even after cleaning. We assumed someone had handled the pane before it cured. The housekeeper complained the smears came back in certain light. We used ammonia. It didn't fully lift. That's not unusual. Oils can ghost. Did you ever see writing in the oil? She asked. Could've, he replied. I don't read windows for stories. We replaced what was cracked. You're talking ghosts. They happen. If you think it's more, tell the troopers. She had already done that. She thanked him and wrote his comments down exactly, adding reportedly and remembered vaguely, because precision and humility can keep a story honest. Over the next week, Rhea kept doing her real job, hail dents, roof lines, signature blocks, while she let the window gather its own weight. The sergeant called one more time to say they had pulled the motel's old work orders. The pane in room 23 had been replaced in early August of 2007, matching the invoice. Maintenance logs around that month showed a housekeeping note. Writing keeps showing on 23 window. Tried vinegar. Still shows in morning. That note was funneled through a retired dispatcher named Sella Winters, who had saved a cardboard banker's box of old shift printouts, the way certain people keep the world from slipping because they know it tries. A quiet logic emerged. The boy missing from 1999, and there was never a name spoken, could not have written he was here on a piece of glass installed 8 years later, unless he returned. That didn't guarantee that he had. The message could have been a relational echo, a cousin, a friend, someone marking grief. But the tape shard and the wax fleck told another piece. The blue wax had come from a cheap crayon, likely pressed while paper was taped inside the frame. That suggested a small person sitting there, drawing, or someone steadied a page while trying to line up letters against the glass. The residue was on the inside spacer, not outside. That meant a moment happened in the room, not on the lot. Vickery asked a small favor that Rhea could do without crossing lines. Return to the room and try to lift a better photograph with crosslight. Rhea booked herself back into the motel on her own dime at the tail end of a loop. She requested 23 and got it after a shrug from Kroll. She came prepared with nothing fancy, just a black foam board to bounce light and a cheap angled flashlight from a hardware store. When the first edge of sun moved off the far hills, the letters bloomed again. She fixed the angle with books and the foam board, then took a series at different exposures. In 2 of them, a smudge sat low and right. Below the third word, barely a mark unless you expected it. It looked like a short curve with 2 dots and a drag. Rhea stared until she understood what shape it wanted to be. A crude smiley face, the kind drawn in 3 seconds by distracted hands. In the room notebook, decades old, Sella Winters had jotted a dispatch aside in 1999 that mentioned the kid's habit of drawing quick smiley faces in margins when nervous, according to a teacher's comment taken by phone. That was not proof. It was a soft echo between 2 separate things. Still, the echo categorized itself as relevant. When Rhea sent the new images, Vickery didn't tell her it solved anything. She said, this tightens the inference that whoever made the marks had knowledge of the kid's habits or was the kid. It also keeps the time frame post-2003. At this point, the facts that remained were simple. A pane installed in early August of 2007 kept showing lifted writing when morning light hit right. Housekeeping noticed. The content read, "He was here," and, in some readings, a simple face below. Tape residue and a crayon fleck lived on the interior spacer. Maintenance logs matched the install. A glazier remembered ghosted oils. Dispatch logs from 1999 contained an aside about a kid's doodles. None of that made a clean line to cause. It did what good detail does. It removed a few wrong lines. The twist, quiet but firm, landed 2 months later. Not for Ria's benefit, and not with fanfare. Vickery called to let her know that, in reviewing archived calls surrounding the motel, a short anonymous tip from late summer of 2007 had been found. The caller, whose voice was masked by the crush of a payphone, had said only, "Check the north building, second floor, room by the ice machine. Mornings show messages." The number had been a dead end then. The note sat in the file without connection because no one had compared it to the install logs. Now they matched. The pane had just been replaced. The message, then, could not be a relic from before the disappearance. It was a marker laid down later, possibly by someone who had returned to a familiar place to say something without saying much at all. Rhea asked the only question she could. "Does this help?" "It helps me not waste time on a wrong year," Vickery said. "Sometimes that's the whole gain." And that was it. No chase, no doors kicked. Instead, a timeline corrected by what stayed behind in a motel room window. Rhea didn't tell the story to anyone who would make it into a campfire shock. She kept the tape shard in a small envelope with the word motel and the date in her hand, even though she knew it had no chain of custody value. It wasn't evidence for court, it was gravity for memory. On her last pass through that stretch of highway before winter, she pulled into the truck stop at dusk and watched the north building of the motel throw its square lights into the lot. The window of room 23 held the look of any other. A woman in a denim jacket let down the blinds. A kid ran past, dragging a suitcase that clicked over seams. None of them knew what the glass had whispered. That felt right. A real story refuses to belong to whoever tells it the loudest. Rhea stood there until the sodium lamps came up and turned everything the same, tired amber. The hum of diesel engines filled the air, the kind of sound that flattens thought. She thought briefly of the words someone had pressed there with damp fingers and of the faint, silly face below. Not testimony, not confession, just a note at the exact height of a small person trying to leave proof of a breath. The truth in it was not the grand kind. It was the modest, late kind, the kind that lets people who do this work say later, with care, that a thing likely happened in a different month than everyone thought, and that a pane of glass, replaced in early August of 2007, had kept those mornings honest for years. She drove away without looking back, because looking back is for when there's nothing left to file. The motel settled into the dark, the windows settled into shadow, and whatever stayed behind stayed there, just oil, just light, just enough. The stories. Dispatcher, who redialed a night number years later. The call that woke the overnight desk never finished cleanly, and the number that hung up stayed burned into memory. The report marked it as an incomplete welfare check request, and the audio ended right after a sharp breath. Leora Vance worked nights at a regional communications center, 36, steady voice, quick notes, routine coffee. She covered a patchwork of small towns around a river, and her goal that night was simple and ordinary. She wanted to make it through the shift with clean logs, then drive home before sunrise. At 2:43, the line flashed unknown number, and a woman whispered that somebody was on the porch. The voice cracked like cold glass, and static clipped the rest. So Leora asked the normal questions. The call died mid-sentence, and the return attempt fed a busy tone that rolled like a slow alarm. Protocol said, log it, dispatch a unit, and move forward with the map. She sent 2 cars across county lines, and she wrote porch contact unknown female, possible prowler, audio cutout. The officers found a silent street and a door light, and the porch camera showed only a moth. The address did not match the call trace, which often happened with rural switches. The closest relevant record was a break-in from 1998, and the same street used to be named differently on paper maps. The officers cleared without contact, and Leora filed it under incomplete with a notation on poor signal. She replayed the clip during the quiet hour before dawn, and she heard a faint tone behind the voice. She had a habit of catching tiny sounds people missed, and she logged them like breadcrumbs for later check. The tone matched the alert from older medical pendants, according to an equipment chart in her drawer. 2 days later, the number could not be connected, and the carrier reported a recycled pool of lines. A supervisor closed the incident, as resolved by patrol presence, and life returned to the ordinary rhythm of alarms and traffic. Leora drove home through thin drizzle and told herself to let the record settle. Years slid by with new software and different chairs, and Leora moved into training and quality checks. She taught new dispatchers to separate panic from facts and to trust logs more than late-night adrenaline. She kept a notebook of unresolved lines, a quiet ledger of what the radio called ghosts. In 2005, a county audit required purging old tapes, and Leora requested the call as a training sample. She argued that the tape showed how to verify address data when signals bounced, and the review board agreed to preserve it. She placed the audio in a folder for classroom use, then forgot it for a while. In 2017, the center switched to digital recording with automatic transcription for flagged words. The legacy folder ported into the new system, and the software saw porch and pendant, then tagged it for quality review. Leora listened again and heard the same faint tone, which still felt wrong and unfinished. She noticed a rhythm behind the static, and it repeated every 6 seconds with small variants. A trainee suggested a smoke detector chirp, but the pattern felt too mechanical for a battery warning. Leora wrote a new note, and she marked it as likely device signal not from residents. A retired technician stopped by for coffee and heard the clip through an open speaker. He said the beeping sounded like a hallway alarm from a care facility, and the pitch matched certain wall units. He gave a rough model name from years earlier, and he shrugged in that cautious way field techs learn. Witness statements in older town council minutes mentioned a small facility that closed in 2006. The building sat at the edge of a service road near the river, and the license lapsed after staff shortages. The address never showed in the dispatch mapping tool, which favored current businesses and active residences. Leora searched archived calls around that road and found short bursts from unknown lines that year. Each clip cut off before a name, and the patrol responses found nothing but chain doors and dust. A maintenance crew had watched the property for a bank, according to one officer report from Spring. She pulled tax records from the county site and found a change of ownership in 2007. The building title shifted to a holding company, which often meant redevelopment, which never came. A satellite photo showed a roof with patched squares and a light pole that leaned toward the access lane. The night number from the porch call mapped to a carrier block once used inside institutions. A policy note in an old binder described internal extensions that could overflow to outbound lines when certain failsafes trip. It was not proof, but it lined up with what the technician had described over coffee. She visited the records room on her lunch and requested dispatch logs for that road after 2006. The clerk pulled a slim folder with dust, and the sheets listed trespass checks requested by neighbors. No violent incidents were recorded, and most notes referenced animals and teens daring each other. A faded memo said interior power was cut to code years ago, and alarms were disconnected with a certificate. The memo was initialed by a contractor who later moved out of state, according to a local paperclip. The paper mentioned a minor zoning fight over repurposing, which stalled and faded. A rumor in a neighborhood forum referenced late-night lights near the loading door, reportedly seen by a delivery driver. The driver claimed to hear a tone like a distant truck backup, and then nothing after he blinked his high beams. The forum thread ended with jokes, and the administrator locked it after a week. Leora requested permission to run a courtesy check by phone on the legacy carrier block. She wrote that the new system showed occasional pings from inactive numbers, and she wanted to verify with the provider. The provider sent a bland letter that said non-billable pings could reflect maintenance checks, which proved little. She let it go again until 2021, when a cold storm knocked power around much of the valley. The center fielded hundreds of calls for downed lines and trees, and unknown numbers flooded the switch when cell towers failed. The old number flashed across a test screen, and a note in red tagged it as historic. It hit her in the middle of managing a pile of alarms, and she felt the odd gravity of unfinished work. Her trainee, a quiet analyst named Matteo Greer, saw her stare and asked what history followed that line. She explained the porch call, the tone, the closed facility, and the recurring pings during outages. He suggested a careful redial during low traffic hours, which fit policy when no private party would be disturbed. The number technically did not belong to a person, and the facility was listed as vacant in tax files. The watch commander noted no risk and approved a controlled test with recording flagged as training. At 3:10 the next night, Leora sat with Matteo in a side room and pressed redial on a clean console. The ring returned at a low volume, and a relay clicked before a voice picked up with a machine crawl. The voice said, "Reception desk. Please hold." The line stayed open with air and faint humming. Leora spoke carefully, and she used the generic script for a wellness verification at an inactive site. The line did not respond like normal interactive voice response, and the hum rose, then settled like heating vents. Matteo pointed to the waveform on the screen, and he traced a stair step that pulsed in threes. She said the center needed to verify status for a safety audit, and could a staff member confirm the building as empty. The voice returned with a single word, and it sounded like census, which made no sense for a desk. The hum changed to a thinner tone, and something clicked like a phone being set down. They stayed quiet, and a tiny echo carried an off-room sound that resembled elevator chimes. The building never had an elevator, according to the old permit in the zoning files, which listed 2 floors only. The chime could have been something else, or a bleed from another source through a carrier trunk. The call lasted 2 minutes, and then a hard click ended it with no final acknowledgement or goodbye. Leora logged every detail with exact time and the conditions of the room, plus the fact that a second console witnessed. She wrote that the voice felt recorded, but not like a standard system recording from that era. A next step followed policy, which said request a daytime site check with property access if possible. The sheriff office called the management company, which reported that the interior phones were long removed with certification. A maintenance vendor met deputies at noon, and the group entered through a side door with a stubborn hinge. They found clean air, paint flakes, and a smell like dry paper after long storage. No phones sat on desks, and no wiring hung from ceilings beyond bundled tubes cut and capped. A panel in the back room had a line of dead indicators, and a label from 2006 named the contractor. A back storage closet held a metal cabinet for telecom terminations, and inside a single light glowed green. The maintenance vendor said the light probably fed from a battery pack, which should have died many years earlier. He pulled the pack, and the light stayed green, which made him raise his eyebrows without a word. They traced the last live wire through conduit to a junction box near the loading door by the ramp. The box led to an old underground line that likely connected to a central office by the highway. The vendor said a ghost loop could be holding a stub signal, which might ring when jolted by storms. The explanation fit enough to calm nerves, and it gave the watch commander a line to give any curious council member. Leora filed the daytime result and waited for the routine to end, but her notebook felt heavier than before. She wanted something cleaner, a line that tied the porch call to a person. She checked archived calls for names near the facility in late 2005, and a surname appeared twice. The name belonged to a kitchen worker who reportedly stayed late to clean and who left town soon after closure. A short article from a community paper mentioned a farewell potluck in a church hall. A social post from years later showed a small photo of a medal on a refrigerator and a caption about nights that never end. The account had poor privacy settings, and it linked to a page for a caretaker group that offered mutual aid. The group had a public list of contacts, and one number matched the surname. She called during the afternoon from a staff phone and explained she was a dispatcher reviewing a historic alarm. The woman who answered identified herself as the former cook, and she said the night phones were a mess back then. She remembered plugging a line into a wall to ask for help during a snow night, then hanging up fast. The year matched the period before closure, and the memory included a porch light that never switched off correctly. The cook said a hallway alarm sometimes tripped when wind hit the wheelchairs stacked near an exit door. She said a pendant kept calling the desk after the resident moved, and staff joked about it. Leora asked if anyone had used an emergency night number taped under a desk, and the woman hesitated, then said maybe. She said an old laminated card listed a direct outside line for after hours when the main switch froze. She added that the card got lost during a water leak, and the sticker glue ruined 2 drawers. The detail matched a photo in the zoning files that showed bubbled plywood under a window near the desk. The water issue provided another path for odd faults, which could keep a line limping and ring when power fluctuated. The cook promised to look through an old box for any scraps, and she promised nothing more. Days later, an envelope arrived addressed to the center with no return, and inside lay half a laminated card. The text read, "Night number for direct line. Use only if house phones fail." The bottom showed 6 digits with 2 missing. The plastic edge was cracked, and a brown stain cut through the second line. Leora held the fragment near the recording console and felt the story settle into a shape that made sense. The porch call likely came from a staffer trying to poke through a dead switch, and the tone was the hallway alarm. The number carried forward through bureaucratic leftovers, and it rang when the storm hit the loop. She still needed the humane piece. The person whose whisper said someone was on the porch that night. She checked weather records for a cold snap that matched the reported snow night, and the timeline met the audit note. A dispatch log from the same week showed a trespass call at a different address with no contact. The officer who filed that trespass had retired to a nearby town, and he answered his landline on a sunny afternoon. He remembered a night when snow fell like ash and radios kept picking up carrier noise. He also remembered stopping near the old facility entrance, then leaving after seeing only footprints of a stray dog. He did not remember any porch lights, but he said the small homes nearby sometimes used helper bulbs that never slept. He also said staff from the facility used to walk to a bus stop at 4 in the morning after night shifts. The whisper could have been a staffer leaving alone, worried by a shape on the ramp. The theory fit and did no harm, and it honored the boundary between records and stories. Leora wrote a final entry into the training file, and she summarized the chain of evidence with careful language. She used reportedly, and dispatch logs and witness statements, and she added the laminated card as a scanned appendix. Before she closed it, she redialed the night number 1 last time to satisfy the part of her that wanted symmetry. The line clicked into a dead tone for 3 slow breaths, then released a single chime in silence. She sat still, then pressed stop and saved the recording with a title that matched her steady heart. She did not post about it, and she did not share more than the classroom frame. The work of nights is often this quiet, a puzzle solved just enough to let people sleep. On her drive home, she watched a porch light fade behind a tree line and let the road carry the rest away. The stories. Why this motel room safe changed everything. They called it a budget motel along a long highway spur, where road dust gathered in corners and secrets settled quietly. The room safe in number 12 looked ordinary enough, powder-coated steel with a keypad that beeped politely at tired travelers. Lyle Garza woke before sunrise on a Tuesday, 38 years old, and working claims for a regional insurer. He had driven 3 hours to meet a policyholder whose pickup had burned behind the old diner, and he wanted clean paperwork today. He checked into the motel first, showered fast, then laid out forms on the dresser, careful about matching VIN digits and timestamps. His plan was simple: wrap the inspection before lunch, then circle back for photos and voice notes after the truck release. He liked driving while the day still felt open, and he told himself the assignment would be routine and forgettable. It had been forgettable until the manager knocked. 2 quick raps, then a pause heavy enough to make him frown. Mara Quintero stood in the doorway with a clipboard, 34, managing rooms and payroll while raising her nephew after school. She asked if he had heard the beeps from the safe, because front desk saw brief power spikes last night. Lyle said he had not used the safe, and she nodded, eyes moving toward the keypad like someone checking a stove twice. Maintenance had logged an odd complaint the previous afternoon. Reportedly, a guest in 12 claimed the safe ate his wallet. The man left before checkout, promising to call the card companies, and a note in the margin said possible intoxication. Mara said housekeeping later pulled the bedding and found a small metal tool near the baseboard. Lyle picked up the tool carefully with a tissue, a thin square of steel with a notch like a feeler gauge. He set it on the desk with his forms, then opened his voice recorder, speaking in that steady tone he used for field notes. He described the room, the safe brand, the tool, and the time on the microwave clock because simple details held steady on lonely days. Mara asked if he knew how to clear the safe code since the master sheet had gone missing during renovations last winter. He did not, but he knew the trick of powering off consumer locks, which could flip hidden defaults, according to a warehouse supervisor he once interviewed. He unplugged the mini fridge, found the breaker panel behind a painting, then asked permission to shut the room briefly. They stood in the doorway while the lights flickered and the highway hummed like a restless air conditioner beyond the lot. He waited 10 seconds, restored power, then tapped the keypad with a ballpoint, feeling silly and a little curious. The safe beeped twice in a lower tone, which he recognized from a training video about apartment lockouts, reportedly used by traveling warranty teams. He tried a factory code that someone had once mumbled during a fire inspection, and the safe chirped, green light winking. The door opened an inch against a sticky seal, and Mara let out a nervous laugh, surprised and worried in equal measure. Inside sat a clear zipper pouch with a folded receipt, a motel keycard from another town, and a small black voice recorder. He found a driver loyalty card attached to the receipt, and he read the printed name softly without repeating it twice. The dates lined up with last week in neat columns, and the purchase list looked like roadside dinners between midnight and 2. He asked Mara if the guest from yesterday had paid cash, and she nodded, then reached for the phone to check archived calls. The front desk handset kept scratchy tapes by default, a habit from the previous owner who never trusted software invoices. She played a call stamped at 2 in the morning, where a tired voice asked for room 12, mentioning a late delivery, and stiff back. Another call at 2:30 asked about vending, and a third at 4 asked if nobody would bother him until noon. Lyle switched to evidence mode, careful and methodical, letting his coffee cool while he cataloged the pouch contents. He photographed the safe before moving anything, then called his supervisor to report an unexpected discovery unrelated to the truck claim. The supervisor told him to act reasonably and preserve anything with identifiable information, then to keep his focus on the scheduled inspection. He listened to the voice recorder after asking Mara to stay within earshot, since 2 listeners felt wiser than one on strange mornings. The first file held roadway noise, then a quiet tone of someone rehearsing directions, same room number repeated like a sticky thought. The second file was shorter, a man saying he could not keep doing this and that she would understand once it was delivered safely. He paused to note the words safely, which felt pointed given the open door and the blinking keypad. He bagged the recorder in a zip bag from his kit, then checked the keycard from the other town, which was stamped with a lion logo. Mara recognized the chain and said there was a property 30 miles north, mostly used by truckers and medical travelers. He returned the room to normal and headed for the burned truck with his camera bag, but his plan had started to wobble. The pickup sat behind a towing yard fence, soot clinging thick to the firewall, while melted wires drooped like tired ivy. He worked the usual grid of photos, then the odometer and the cargo bed, then cross-reference with dispatch notes he had requested by email. The fire report smelled like common engine loss, not sabotage, and he felt relief settle along his shoulders as the cause narrowed. He dictated measurements and closed the laptop, then looked at his watch and thought about the safe again and the trembling voice. He felt a nudge of duty that had nothing to do with premiums, and he drove back to the motel through heat that made the road shimmer. Mara met him with a printout of last night guests, which listed an alias that matched the loyalty card name partly. The address field showed a mail drop location, familiar to freight drivers who rolled through without a fixed base. She said a long white tractor had idled near the ice machine last night, according to a neighbor who called about fumes after midnight. He asked for the neighbor number, then listened to a careful woman describe a man in a reflective jacket with a limp. She said he stayed near room 12 door, not inside, as if waiting for someone to arrive quietly or leave quickly. She heard 2 quiet knocks around 3, and a soft voice answered, then a cart rattle like someone moving luggage without wheels. Lyle opened the pouch again and noticed a handwritten code on the receipt back, 4 digits and a messy star next to it. He tried the code on the safe, and the delay light flashed, which often meant an old user lockout or a wrong sequence. He snapped a photo and lowered the door, then rolled the notched tool between his fingers, a weight that felt borrowed from someone patient. He thought about a repairman he had interviewed in 2019 who taught him that thieves love patterns more than courage. The man said patterns live in receipts, tolls, and vending logs, because tired people seek familiar sandwiches and coffee brands. Lyle searched the loyalty program website on his phone, typed the partial name and 4 digits, and got a generic profile with travel points. The profile showed recent redemptions listed by city, and he wrote them on a notepad, then drew lines between dates and approximate routes. The cities formed a loop around distribution centers, with brief pauses near hospitals and bulk pharmacy hubs according to public maps. He felt his heart step faster as the voice recorder line about delivered safely nudged his thoughts toward the quiet side of medicine. He told Mara he would drive north to the Lion Logo Motel for a quick visit, and she insisted on calling ahead politely. The clerk up there skimmed her stay sheets and mentioned a forgotten envelope last week, found under a mattress frame during turnover. The envelope held nothing when housekeeping retrieved it, but a corner showed marks from a rubber band, reportedly stretched tight. He reached the northern property by mid-afternoon, watched trucks rock gently in wind, and asked for the manager on duty. A tall man with tired eyes met him in the lobby, said a nurse had asked about a lost pouch 3 nights ago. She wore a badge from a staffing agency, spoke quickly, and left a number that went to voicemail full by morning. The manager allowed a quick look at the lost and found cabinet, which contained phone chargers, a chipped mug, 3 lanyards, and a plastic bag with an empty pharmacy sticker peeled halfway. Lyle photographed the bag and wrote the former label number carefully, then stepped into the parking lot to call a friend in compliance he trusted. The friend checked a public database of recalls and shortages, then told him to consider the rise in small clinical thefts along transport corridors. He returned to his car and replayed the second audio file, hearing the way the man swallowed hard between sentences. The phrase "delivered safely" stuck again, and he wondered if safely meant to someone specific, not to a warehouse or anonymous shelf. He drove back to the first motel with a plan forming, not quite a theory, but a set of steps that could either untangle or embarrass him. He asked Mara for permission to review last week's camera footage that covered the breezeway near room 12, and she agreed. The feed was old, grainy, and stamped with the wrong date, since nobody reset it after storms in 2015. Still, silhouettes moved clearly enough. And at 3:12, a figure in a reflective jacket appeared with a short, careful stride. The figure waited near the door, then crouched to slide something under, then stood fast as another figure approached from the stairwell. The second person carried a rolling cart with a blanket thrown over, which hung low enough to hide a small cooler shape. They exchanged a short handshake, then rolled the cart toward the soda machine area, where cameras always blinked with static. Lyle paused the frame and sketched the handshake position, because small, consistent gestures tied people to habits when faces stayed hidden. He compared the notebook times to the archived calls, matching the neighbor report with the footage minute stamp nearly exactly. He folded his notes and looked at Mara, who watched quietly with the clipboard held like a shield against a sudden chill. He called the non-emergency line and asked to speak with property crimes, then explained he was an adjuster who found items in a room safe. He said the items might connect to an ongoing pattern, not a single incident, and that he was available to hand them over cleanly. The dispatcher thanked him and routed the call, and he kept his voice steady while explaining that nobody was hurt today. The detective who arrived wore a tie gone soft at the edges, a man who had seen this exact motel a dozen times. He took the pouch, the recorder, and copies of the photos, then asked Lyle to explain the breaker trick and the code attempts. He nodded at the handshake frame and said a group had moved product along back roads for months, staying under dollar thresholds on purpose. Lyle asked quietly if product meant medicine, and the detective said people cut solutions with water and resold to small clinics. In some stories, the clinics were victims with forged orders, and in others, they were partners, trying to stretch short supplies like taffy. The man in the reflector jacket likely ran deliveries for cash while hauling legal freight, which made tracing routes messy and confusing. The detective listened to the voice files twice, then looked at the loyalty redemptions and circled 2 cities with his pen. He said the phrase delivered safely could mean to a person at a care home who could not pay official prices anymore. The pouch might have served as a drop signal, and the room safe might have held a stopgap in case someone panicked. They took statements from Mara and the neighbor by phone, and the manager at the northern property sent a scanned copy of his notes. The detective collected the notch tool and said it was standard for bypassing cam locks, which matched a series of quiet thefts from vending. He asked Lyle to write a formal summary of his steps, meticulous and dated, and to expect a follow-up if a warrant landed later. Lyle finished the paper part in his room, breathing slow while light crept through the blinds in a warm, tired stripe. He wrote down the way the safe beeped twice after power restoration, which suggested a default that any one patient could eventually find. He wrote the route loop and the hospital adjacency, and he wrote the voice phrasing exactly because transcription mattered when memories warped. He closed his laptop and stared at the open safe like it wanted to be ordinary again, silent and blank and light. He felt that shift people talk about when routine work bends into something it has no business touching on a weekday. He thought about honest clinics, rationing doses, then about someone paying cash at 3 in the morning because a parent cried. At dusk, the detective called back and said a unit found the white tractor idling near a different budget property downtown. The driver had the same chain lanyard from the lost and found cabinet, and his phone contained notes about room safes by brand. He reportedly told officers he was only a messenger and that someone else handled actual swapping and dilution, which sounded flat and practiced. Lyle listened quietly and said he would be available if a deposition request arrived. Then he sat with the keycard on the dresser. He knew he would remember the feel of that notched tool because it had a purpose-built patience that felt personal. He knew he would remember the cheap beep of the safe and the way a single small space changed the line of his day. A week later, he got an email from the detective, brief and measured, thanking him for the timeline and the careful photos. The message said the pouch had traces of saline and a label adhesive compound common to medical packaging of a certain class. The voice on the recorder matched a man pulled over near a way station, according to dispatch logs and an archived booking photo. Lyle drove back to the motel after closing another case, and he asked Mara how business felt since the long Tuesday. She said people still stopped for highway rest, and she tightened a few procedures quietly, preferring to let small changes speak. She now kept master codes in a locked drawer and replaced 3 aging safes with models that logged attempts for a full week. They stood in room 12 a moment, like visitors paying respects to an inanimate witness that never blinked. The safe sat closed and calm, doing exactly what a box was meant to do, which felt both reassuring and strange. He signed the receipt for his stay, then shook her hand, and promised to bring better stories next time through. On the drive home, he thought about the phrase delivered safely again and how words can hide more than they reveal. He wondered how many small transactions keep the world running, good and bad, unremarkable and decisive, stacked behind quiet doors. He decided the safe had not made him heroic or special, it had only reminded him that dull edges can cut when pressure builds. He kept working claims, taking pictures of bent bumpers and damp carpet, writing notes with careful times and plain language. He still believed that truth likes details, and that details prefer patient notebooks, not flashy speeches or clever hunches. When he thought about that Tuesday, he did not think about danger or chase lights. He thought about how a box opened and a day veered left. Mara hired another housekeeper and bought a better cart, one that glided without rattling near cameras and soda machines. She laughed more at the front desk now, but her eyes still checked keys and codes before she turned off the lights. She told her nephew that small routines matter, like counting towels and returning clipboards, because order resists the creep of careless luck. The detective moved on to other cases and sent one last note months later, carefully worded, acknowledging ongoing court schedules. He wrote that the room safe discovery had clarified timing between suspects, which helped align witness statements with fuel receipts precisely. He added a line about public hearings scheduled for late next spring, where facts would hopefully land on paper clearly. The motel kept renting room 12 to travelers who wanted ground-level convenience and an easy walk to the ice. The safe held wallets and passports and nothing dramatic for a while, which suited everyone whose name stayed off any report. The highway kept pouring itself past the parking lot, and the night clerk kept coffee hot for anyone who needed comfort. Lyle sometimes thought about stopping by without a claim, just to buy a soda and wave at the office through dusty glass. He pictured the safe blinking quietly in that square of afternoon sun, as if practicing for whatever day came next. He accepted that the box had not changed him completely, but it had polished a habit he already valued deeply. He looked back on it like a narrow bridge he crossed safely, not a legend, just a real span over a quiet creek. He had listened, he had written, he had looked twice, and he had taken small steps that lined up neatly. That felt like enough for a life that preferred steady roads to loud headlines, and it still does. The stories. Why this librarian reopened a cold map drawer. In late September of 2014, the quiet town library off Route 47 got a new head librarian named Corinne Ashland. She was 39, a former archivist who'd spent years cataloging geological surveys for a state university. By all accounts, Corinne wasn't the kind of person to chase ghosts until the day she decided to reopen an old, locked map drawer that everyone else had forgotten. The drawer sat in the basement stacks, labeled Time State Topography 1952 to 1958 asterisk. Its brass handle had gone dull with age, and the key was missing. For years, staff used the cabinet as a makeshift table for coffee mugs and boxes of donations. But one morning, while rearranging a shipment of donated atlases, Corinne noticed a faint rust-colored smear near the label. It looked like dried clay or maybe iron dust. Either way, it didn't belong there. She mentioned it to her assistant, and he laughed, saying, "That drawer's cursed. Ask Mrs. Langley. She swears a surveyor disappeared working on those maps." Corinne smiled politely, but something in her stayed hooked on the idea. She asked around. The drawer dated back to when the building served as a records annex for the county planning office. In the mid-50s, several regional floodplain studies were stored there before the files were relocated or supposedly relocated to the state archives. No one ever verified that. When Corinne checked the archive's digital inventory, she found gaps. 4 missing surveys, all from the same year, 1957. They covered a stretch of riverland that was later condemned for a hydroelectric project that never materialized. That evening, Corinne used a universal key set kept for restoration work and opened the map drawer for the first time in decades. Inside were rolled parchments bound with cotton strings, their edges yellowed. Beneath them, she found a tin box wrapped in wax paper. Inside the box lay a water-stained notebook, a compass with a cracked lens, and a faded photograph of 2 men standing beside a field the size of a football stadium, ringed by survey poles. On the back of the photo, someone had written, asterisk, last day before the dig, GM asterisk. Corinne scanned the initials against old employment rosters. There was a Gregory Mallon, a field engineer who'd gone missing in June of 1958. Officially, he'd left the project for family reasons, but the local paper from that summer told a stranger story. Asterisk, surveyor vanishes near proposed reservoir site. Search suspended after 3 days. Asterisk, no follow-up, no body recovered. Corinne started a file. 1. She called the county records department. A man named Leland Cross, an aging clerk who'd worked there since the 70s, remembered something. Mahlon. Yeah? He was working on the Franklin Bend plan. Whole thing got shelved when the funding dried up. I heard his partner quit soon after. Leland didn't recall the partner's name, but he mentioned an old storage trailer the county once kept near the riverbank. They hauled the trailer out after a flood in the 60s, he said. If anything survived, it's in the historical depot now. The depot was just a few miles away. Corinne drove there that weekend, signed in as a researcher, and requested the Franklin Bend materials. The clerk brought her a warped cardboard box smelling of mildew. Inside were soil samples, invoices, and a reel of magnetic tape marked Audio Log 4 field notes. She had to borrow an old player from the depot staff. The recording was faint, but clear enough to recognize 2 male voices. Asterisk, Greg, you're not logging this, right? Asterisk. Asterisk. Relax. It's just us. But if this ridge keeps sinking, we need to report it. Asterisk. Relax. Relax. Asterisk. Asterisk. We will. After the last survey, the company can't afford another delay. Asterisk. The tape ended with wind noise and a scrape, like a microphone hitting dirt. Corinne replayed it 3 times, listening for landmarks. At one point, one of them mentioned mile marker 12 and the culvert by the sycamores. Using digitized topographic maps, she traced those features to a narrow bend along the river, now fenced off as private land. When she brought this to the local sheriff's office, the deputy shrugged. If you're talking about MrBallen, that case is older than my dad. We can't go digging around on private property for a rumor. But Corinne wasn't chasing rumor. She was following evidence. She emailed a geologist friend from her university days, Dr. Theo Ricks, who specialized in landslide patterns. Theo ran a ground-penetrating radar survey along that same bend under a research permit for soil erosion. The data showed a deep subsidence pocket about 20 feet from the current riverline, consistent with an old collapsed tunnel. Theo sent her the printout and a note, asterisk, you might have just found their camp trench. Asterisk. They returned together a week later. Theo handled the radar equipment while Corinne recorded the coordinates. Near sunset, a small piece of metal surfaced from the silt, a corroded survey tripod leg, stamped Property of Franklin Bend Hydro Limited. The find was modest, but it confirmed the crew had worked exactly where she predicted. From that point, Corinne began piecing the timeline. The notebook from the tin box mentioned sudden soil shifts, pressure readings, and the phrase asterisk, map variance, river shift, not natural. Asterisk. The handwriting was MrBallen's, matching samples from his earlier reports. It appeared he suspected someone had deliberately diverted a drainage channel to falsify flood risk data, possibly to inflate land value before government acquisition. If true, exposing it could have derailed the whole project. The company had millions at stake. MrBallen filed his last note 2 days before he vanished. Corinne cross-checked the company records and found the corporation dissolved in 1961, right after a quiet lawsuit settlement with an undisclosed party. No public record linked it to MrBallen. But tucked inside the notebook's back cover, hidden beneath the lining, she found a short letter addressed to M.R. Hanley, attorney at law. It never got mailed. The ink was blurred but readable enough. Asterisk, they moved the stakes. If anything happens, check the revised map in drawer C. It's the only truth left. Asterisk. Drawer C was the one she'd opened. By early winter, local journalists picked up her findings. The county authorized a limited excavation, mainly to verify the historic maps. When workers dug near the subsidence pocket, they uncovered remnants of an old metal barrel containing drafting tools and fragments of canvas. Among them was a wristwatch, glass shattered, still faintly engraved, asterisk GM, asterisk dental fragments. Nearby, later confirmed MrBallen's identity. The discovery didn't just solve a missing person case, it revealed a quiet cover-up. The original floodplain data, preserved in those maps, showed the river was unstable long before developers planned the reservoir. Ignoring it had likely saved the investors short-term losses, but cost one man his life. The county issued a formal acknowledgement of error, though no one alive faced charges. The land was later rezoned as a conservation area. Corinne kept working at the library, though people now came from all over asking about the librarian who solved the map mystery. She never took credit beyond saying she just followed what was left behind. The old drawer was cleaned, cataloged, and displayed behind glass with the tin box and the compass inside. Every so often, she'd unlock the case to polish the brass handle, and she'd think about MrBallen's note, the way he wrote Time's the only truth left, asterisk. She understood now that archives aren't just about paper or ink, they're about the things people try to bury, and the few who still choose to look. By the next spring, the library basement smelled of fresh paint. The drawer sat quietly in its corner, again, cool metal against the hum of fluorescent lights. And that was enough. No headlines, no dramatics, just a reminder that sometimes reopening the past isn't about curiosity. It's about letting someone finally be found. The stories. The motel room safe with a secret ledger. The motel sat just off a two-lane highway that curved through a stretch of desert where radio stations faded to static. The sign still buzzed faintly, a few letters missing so that it read, asterisk, Elton Mo L asterisk. For years, the rooms had been rented mostly to truckers, traveling salesmen, and people who didn't want their names on a record. But in the spring of 2011, a part-time maintenance worker named Vince Daly age 42, came across something in room 12 that would change how the place was remembered. Vince wasn't an ambitious man. He fixed air conditioners, mowed the patchy grass, and replaced broken keys. On that particular morning, he was there to remove a faulty safe from under the dresser. It had been locked for years. Ever since the manager before last passed away, the new owner told him to cut it open so the space could finally be rented again. Inside was a single object, a small black ledger, its edges curled and faintly sticky, as if something had spilled on it long ago. The front cover had no name, no label, just a thumbprint stain. Vince assumed it was nothing. Maybe a guest had used it to keep receipts. He tossed it in his tool bag and went on with his work. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of him. He opened the ledger while sitting at the counter of a diner across the road. The first few pages were normal lists of initials, dates, dollar amounts, but halfway through, the tone shifted. Names were written in full, alongside words like balance cleared and returned. Some lines had stars next to them, and others were crossed out entirely. Near the back, he saw a series of entries dated between 1984 and 1987, all under a heading written in shaky block letters, Collections Room 12. At first, Vince thought it might have been a motel expense log, but a few of the names seemed familiar. One matched a woman whose picture still hung behind the front desk, a former housekeeper who disappeared decades ago. He mentioned it the next day to Marlene Greer, the daytime manager, who shrugged and said old records were full of ghost entries. Still, something in her expression told him she wasn't entirely surprised. Over the next few days, Vince couldn't let it go. He went to the county library and looked through microfilm archives of local newspapers. In late August of 1986, he found a short article about a missing motel employee named Carla Mendez. The story said she'd last been seen leaving work after a night shift, carrying the deposit bag for the week's earnings. Police assumed robbery, but no suspect was ever found. That name Carla was written 3 times in the ledger, each next to the same date. August 22, 1986. One entry read, final balance, then ledger closed. The coincidence was too clean to ignore. Vince took photocopies of the pages and showed them to a retired sheriff's deputy he knew, Alton McCrae, who had worked the area back then. Alton took one look and went quiet. After a moment, he said the handwriting reminded him of Ray Weller, the motel owner in the 80s. Weller had died in 1992 after his car went off a canyon road. No foul play suspected, just bad brakes and too much whiskey. Alton said there were rumors Weller used the motel as a front for short-term loans cash advances to locals who couldn't go through a bank. The ledger might have been his way of keeping track of who owed what. The crossed-out names, he explained, could mean debts paid. Or something worse. Vince started noticing how people reacted when he mentioned the find. Some locals would change the subject. Others told him not to dig. The place had been losing business for years, and nobody wanted reporters sniffing around. But he couldn't shake the thought that someone might still care about what happened to Carla Mendez. He tracked down her sister, Isabel who still lived 2 towns over. When he showed her the ledger, she didn't even touch it. She just said, "We already tried for 25 years. Nobody cared then. They won't now." Before leaving, she pointed at one of the other names, P. Larkin. He was a regular there, she said. Used to drink with the owner. Ask the bartender from that time if he's still alive. Vince found Pete Larkin listed in a 2020 phone directory. He was living in a nursing facility about 30 miles away. When Vince called, the man's memory was fading, but one thing stuck. There was cash, Larkin said. Every weekend, people paid what they owed. Weller called it the 12 Club. Said if you didn't pay up, you checked out for good. It sounded like drunken talk, but when Vince returned to the ledger, he realized that almost all entries labeled cleared were tied to weekends. One page listed the amount $500 next to C. Mendez, and a note, handled in 12. At this point, the facts that remained were simple. Carla disappeared on August 22, 1986. Weller's ledger mentioned her by name that same day. Weller died 6 years later in what might have been an accident, and now, decades later, his motel still stood, barely operating, with a safe no one had opened until Vince cut it loose. He reported everything to the local sheriff's office. They took the ledger as evidence, but nothing came of it for months. Then, in early October of 2012, a construction crew working on a new drainage ditch behind the property uncovered partial human remains. Dental records confirmed they belonged to Carla Mendez. The investigation was reopened. Forensic teams matched residue from the ledger's pages to soil found at the burial site. Both contained the same rare industrial solvent used in the motel's janitorial supplies during the 80s. It wasn't enough to convict anyone, but it closed a circle. The 12 Club wasn't a rumor. It was bookkeeping for threats carried out. By the time the motel finally shut down, Vince had long quit. He moved north, took a job maintaining cabins at a lakeside resort, and stopped talking about what he'd found. Reporters wrote short pieces calling it the Ledger case, and then it faded again into local legend. Years later, when the building was demolished, one last item turned up in the rubble, a second, safe, smaller, newer, but sealed tight. Inside, they found only a key-tagged room 12. Copy. Nothing else, no pages, no ledgers, just that key. Placed deliberately. People who'd worked there guessed Vince had planted it, a quiet nod to what he'd uncovered, but those who knew him said he wouldn't have done that. He hated attention, maybe it was Weller's doing, a strange joke meant to outlast him. Either way, the motel sign was gone, the ground was leveled, and the highway kept humming like nothing had ever happened. Still, sometimes at night, when the wind passes through the empty lot, locals say you can hear the faint rattle of a loose metal door like an old safe settling back into silence. Whether that's true or not hardly matters. What stayed was the story, and the proof that even the most ordinary places can keep ledgers of their own. The stories. Ranger station logs noted a missing hiker at noon. The radio crackled just after lunch, and the clipboard showed a blank line beside a borrowed bear spray canister. The word missing sat in block letters on the duty sheet, and the clock over the map board ticked louder than usual. Renata Vale worked the desk that week, 38, seasonal ranger with a stubborn streak for clean paperwork. The station sat outside a popular canyon where the trail ran through scrub pine, and July heat made the air taste metallic. Her plan for the day was simple: clear the lost and found shelf and call 2 vendors about water filters. Plans changed when a volunteer handed her the trail phone and said a worried brother was holding. He said his sister failed to text from the halfway point, and he used the word routine like a spell. He gave a name that did not exactly match the sign-in sheet, and his voice thinned when Renata asked about clothing and pack color. He had a screenshot of their last conversation, time-stamped just before noon, and said a ranger blog recommended checking the canyon switchbacks first. Renata felt the quiet alarm that starts in a seasoned ranger's hands, the kind that steadies rather than shakes. She called the number on the permit sticker that matched the closest name, and a voicemail box chirped with a clipped greeting. She checked the station cameras that watched the parking turnouts and found a silver sedan rolling in at 10:20. The driver wore a brimmed hat and taped the ends of the laces. A detail Renata wrote down because details age poorly when pressure arrives. The volunteer named Marco searched the trailhead kiosk for the morning log, while Renata stepped into the sun and scanned the ridge. Wind pushed dry heat across the gravel, and a jay scolded from the utility pole. She keyed dispatch and said they had a potential overdue hiker, not confirmed, and that initial checks were underway. She kept the language tight because words build momentum, and momentum brings helicopters that the budget cannot always afford. A woman in gym shorts approached with a dog and said she had heard a shout near the lower falls, short and sharp like a name. The dog sniffed the air and leaned toward the creek, then lost interest and sat her down. Renata asked about time and direction, then thanked her and pressed the note card against the map with a magnet. Witness statements fail without anchors, so she pinned the details to the grid and reviewed them aloud. Marco returned with the binder of trail camera stills that interns pulled from a motion unit near the bridge. The images showed the brimmed hat at 11:16, then again at noon on the switchback above the falls. The shirt color looked different under the dappled light, a common effect on digital stills that gave Renata a moment of doubt. She printed 2 frames and circled the pack strap, then clipped them to a clipboard for the field check. Her simple plan melted fully when dispatch called back with archived calls. A person had phoned the tip line at 11:42 and asked about trail closures on the East Rim, then hung up when asked for a callback number. The caller used a masked service that had failed before, and the audio had that empty room sound that suggested a roadside kiosk or a cheap motel. Renata pressed a knuckle against the map and agreed to log the call as related. She put together a step-by-step, starting light and staying local to the canyon. First, a hasty sweep from the bridge to the switchbacks with 1 ranger and 1 volunteer. Second, a parking lot inventory to match plates to permits and to note any vehicles with cooling engines that did not match sign-ins. Third, a witness walk with the dog owner to the lower falls, with a promise to return her to the trailhead within the hour. She radioed the plan and heard the click of acknowledgement from Wyatt Perales, 32, trail tech and steady boots in rough ground. They moved out along the creek, and the summer smell shifted from dust to algae and sunscreen. A couple in sun hats pointed to a narrow ledge where someone had left a crushed water bottle and a candy wrapper. Renata photographed the area with a department phone, then bagged the trash because trash turns into stories when the wrong eyes find it. She kept her sentences short on the radio and noted her times with a pen that left grooves deeper than the ink. At the switchback, Wyatt found boot scuffs that angled off the tread and into scrub so tight it would punish any shortcut. He pointed to a pressed patch of grass, then to a low branch with a pale scrape that matched soft plastic. Renata crouched and saw a faint thread from athletic tape, the same color she remembered from the still. The thread clung to rough bark, a small but useful tether between the images and the ground. They moved higher and reached a shallow spur where the view opened into a dry basin. On the spur, a pair of hikers said they passed a woman alone who looked back often, as if waiting for someone who never arrived. The hikers spoke slowly and paused to remember, then agreed to write brief statements at the station later that afternoon. They offered a photo from a distance that showed only a shape in heat shimmer, and the horizon looked bleached and wide. Renata asked the brother for more context by text, keeping questions narrow and practical. What snacks did she favor? Any injuries last year? And did she ever speak about this specific canyon? He replied that his sister planned the hike to test a new route from a guide forum and sent a blurry screenshot of a message board thread. A username bragged about a hidden shelf that saved 20 minutes, and that sentence pressed a new line into Renata's plan. She called the district's archive and asked for old incident notes related to the shelf, and the clerk said there were 2 minor rescues on a heat weekend 3 summers ago. Those notes described short slips and stubborn walkers and contained a detail that felt right and wrong at the same time. Both incidents started at noon when shadows shortened and depth perception failed, and both involved hikers who disliked crowds and sought quiet. Another message arrived from the brother that changed tone from worried to careful. He said a coworker reportedly spotted a silver sedan at a grocery near the highway at 1:30 with the brimmed hat visible through the windshield. He said the coworker did not want to get involved, and that felt useful in a different way. Renata thanked him and wrote the time down, then circled highway with a question mark that drew a slow breath from Wyatt. They pushed through Manzanita to reach the rumored shelf and found it narrower than described, with a crumbling margin that looked unfriendly. A faint shoe print showed a split tread that matched a popular brand, and a smear on the rock smelled like cheap bug spray. Wyatt anchored a line to a juniper and leaned just far enough to see a small alcove with shade and a clean view of the bridge. A person could wait there unseen, then return to the trail when passing groups moved on. Renata called dispatch to log the shelf and asked for a quiet check on the grocery footage if the store manager would allow it without a formal request. She kept the ask light, and the clerk at the store reportedly agreed to review only the parking lot from 1:15 to 1:45. While they waited, they spoke to a fisherman who said he had heard someone practicing a greeting near the bridge, polite and warm, the way people rehearse before calling an office. They returned to the station to regroup and found the dog owner had kept her promise about the statements. She drew a crude map of her walk and marked the spot where the shout came, which lined up with the shelf by a neat stroke. Renata checked the plate list from the lot, and one entry bothered her because the registration sticker covered an older color. That usually meant a cheap repaint, often done quickly when a car changes hands among friends. The call from the store came back while the clock swept toward 4. Footage reportedly showed a silver sedan near the outer edge, and the driver wore a brimmed hat. The camera caught the driver opening the trunk, then closing it without removing anything. The driver sat for a full minute, then left the lot with a slow signal that suggested careful timing rather than confusion. That action made less sense if a hiker was lost, and more sense if a narrative needed space. Renata asked the brother to send any recent photos of his sister's gear so they could match brands and colors to the thread on the branch. He sent a camping picture from spring, and the pack straps matched the stills with unnerving accuracy. He also sent a photo of a laminated media badge from a fitness channel and apologized for forgetting to mention that side gig. Renata stared at the badge and felt the click of pieces rubbing into place. She pulled the permit files again and found a second entry from the morning that used a near match to the name, with a transposed letter that looked accidental at first glance. The second entry had a note in different handwriting that said, "Early shoot near bridge, approved by office." The office had approved no such shoot as far as Renata knew, and a deep memory of an email warning about unauthorized product videos rose to the surface. Those videos sometimes used stage trouble to capture attention, then rode the wave for clicks and ad buys. She contacted the regional office and asked whether a crew had requested permission that day, and the answer came back tidy and negative. The office asked for details, and Renata kept her language cool and focused on logs and times. She included the masked call and the quiet shelf, and the fact that a brimmed hat appeared where a plan would benefit from a dramatic turn. She asked for guidance on whether to treat the case as a welfare check or as a permit violation with a side of false alarm. Before the office replied, Wyatt flagged a new detail from the camera stills that had felt unimportant earlier. The brimmed hat in the second still carried a small pin that caught the sun, and the same pin appeared on the media badge in the spring photo. It was a tiny compass rose with 3 points bent, a logo for a training program that marketed grit and quiet strength. The pin created a line between online identity and trail identity, often a line people try to blur when views are currency. The volunteer team returned from the upper spur with a clean report and no sign of distress along the ridge. A group of teenagers said they watched a drone rise above the bridge and glide toward the shelf, then return quickly when someone shouted about rules. The teenagers filmed the drone on a phone, and the video captured the brimmed hat figure leaning on the railing, then turning away when the shout landed. Renata saved the clip and documented the time, then asked the group to leave contact details in case the office needed follow-up. As evening lights softened, dispatch called with a quiet advisory. A patrol unit had found a silver sedan parked at a scenic turnout 15 miles east, empty and cooling, with a folded jacket in the back. The officer waited nearby without lights and reported a second vehicle pulling in close, then leaving when the cruiser rolled forward. The plate on the second car belonged to a rental agency with a flexible policy about credit cards, a detail Renata captured without judgment. The office finally replied and advised a welfare check with a parallel inquiry into misuse of emergency channels. They recommended a measured approach that prioritized safety and avoided public drama. Renata agreed, and then called the brother again and asked him to come to the station, explaining that in-person rooms make details easier to manage. He arrived with shoulders high and hands careful, and he looked like someone who disliked being on the wrong side of a counter. He admitted the channel sometimes staged challenges, and that his sister had pitched a solo speed test that needed daylight and a sense of risk. He insisted that no real danger was planned, only a late check-in, followed by a triumphant return and a lesson about preparation. He said a friend reportedly stood by with water near the highway, and the masked call was about closures because crowds ruined dramatic timing. He said he panicked when she missed the planned text by a full hour and called the station because the bit felt wrong. Renata listened and typed, then asked to speak with the sister by phone. The brother made a call on speaker, and the brimmed hat answered with a small breath, then a quick apology that sounded practiced. She said she was safe and nearby, and that she feared trouble once she realized how many people had watched the bridge. She agreed to meet at the station within 30 minutes and added that the shelf was a mistake because the rock felt greasy and mean. She arrived with salt on her face and a steady gaze, 34, freelance trainer and editor for a mid-sized channel. She wore the pin on the brim and kept her hands open on the counter, then gave a full account that matched much of the timeline. She described the shelf and the alcove and admitted the staged silence to build tension for a cut. She said the drone operator backed out when a shout scared him and that the grocery stop was a pause to decide whether to end the bit early. Renata walked her through the consequences with a calm voice and clear steps. They would log the misuse of the term missing in the station ledger and forward a report on the masked call to the office. They would recommend a fine for the drone flight near the bridge and review the permit files for the transposed name entry. They would also offer a voluntary donation to the volunteer team for the hours spent and recommend a public safety note if the channel posted any edited footage. The woman nodded and said she understood, then asked whether the station planned to call the county. Renata said the county dispatch already sat in the loop and had agreed to remain cooperative as long as the channel avoided inflaming viewers. She added that the station took missing reports seriously because moments consume resources, and that even staged quiet pressures real systems. The woman agreed to record a clear statement and accepted a brochure on safe filming that looked oddly gentle in the harsh light. Wyatt stepped outside and watched the last cars roll out of the lot, and the air finally cooled enough to feel kind. The dog from earlier barked once from a passing truck, and the fisherman from the creek lifted 2 fingers without slowing. Renata filed the forms and wrote a final note that tied the shelf to the old rescues and the pin to the badge and the masked call to timing. The station lights hummed and the clock hands slid past 6, then found their mark without ceremony. By the time the brother and sister left, the word missing on the duty sheet had a line through it. Renata kept the original note card with the magnet hole because records tell stories when memory wants to embellish. The office would likely call tomorrow and ask for clarifications, and the drone policy would probably gain a new sentence. She felt the usual mix of relief and irritation that follows a false alarm, and the strange sympathy for people who turn risk into currency. Later, the channel posted a short video that downplayed the panic, and the comments argued about rules and grit. The station received 2 thank you emails from hikers who heard the news secondhand and a complaint from a person who disliked the fines on principle. Renata archived the messages and watered the plant on the windowsill, then wrote one more line in the log about the shelf that was not a shortcut. The sentence ended with a plain warning that noon creates flat shadows and false confidence, a small truth inside a larger one. In quiet moments after a shift like that, she believed most people want a story that forgives them. Trails do not forgive, they teach. And the classroom never closes just because cameras blink. The station would open again at 7, and the clipboard would carry new names, and the clock would tick in the same steady way. Somewhere on the ridge, a jay would scold the wind, and the shelf would wait with its narrow promise, ready to turn bravado into paperwork.